The parking garage under the Frank Irwin Center at the University of Texas is not a place designed for significant moments. It is concrete and fluorescent and smells of exhaust and the particular cold that accumulates in underground spaces regardless of the temperature outside. I was sitting in the driver's seat of my 10-year-old Civic in level B2, wearing full academic regalia, the blue velvet doctoral hood, the gold cords representing a fellowship in nutritional biochemistry that had taken 8 years and every ounce of discipline I possessed to earn, and I was listening to a 43-second voicemail from my mother for the third time in a row. I had played it once in disbelief once to make sure I had heard it correctly, and now a third time because I needed to confirm that the tone was what I thought it was. The tone was cheerful, not apologetic. Genuinely cheerful, the warmth of someone reporting good news who does not understand why it might land otherwise. She said they were so sorry to miss the ceremony, that they had gotten the live stream link mixed up, and by the time they sorted it out, the connection wasn't working, but that it was okay because they were at Leo's backyard, and he had just gotten the news about his promotion at Hayes Fresh Distributors, and everyone was together and wasn't that wonderful. She said she hoped my graduation went well. She said it the way you say you hope someone's dentist appointment went well, a minor errand resolved on to the next thing. I want to be precise about what I was 40 minutes away from. Not a graduation in the general sense, a doctoral ceremony, 8 years of work, a federally funded fellowship mapping the metabolic mechanisms of diet-related disease in rural and underserved populations, a dissertation that my committee had reviewed with the word rigorous appearing in 3 independent evaluations. I had been working toward this specific morning since I was 23 years old. I had not taken a single summer off. I had chosen precision over speed and depth over credential. And in 40 minutes, a dean was going to hand me a piece of paper that said, Dr. Clara Hayes, and it was going to mean something specific earned in a specific way, and no one in my family was going to be in the room when it happened. I opened the family group text. Leo's BBQ had generated a continuous scroll of content since mid-morning grill photos, fire emojis, a video of my father laughing at something off camera, a photo of Leo holding a spatula with the caption of the man himself. My message from 2 hours earlier, a simple line with the ceremony start time and the building entrance sat above all of it, with no reaction at all. Not a thumbs up, not a heart. The chat had simply moved past it the way water moves around a stone. I sat in the parking garage in my doctoral regalia for another minute. Then I put my phone in my bag, got out of the car, and walked toward the elevator. I had a ceremony to attend. I was going to attend it. My brother Leo is 5 years older than me and has always occupied a different volume of space in our family's attention. Not because he demanded it, he did not have to demand anything. He was naturally magnetic, the kind of person who fills a room by entering it, who makes people feel included, simply by paying attention to them, and my parents oriented toward him the way plants orient toward light, without deciding to simply as a matter of what pulled them. His B-plus average in high school was celebrated as evidence of balance and a full social life. My full academic scholarships were received with a nod and a comment about how I looked tired. Did I need to sleep more? Was I eating enough? The subtext was consistent across years and across contexts. The achievement was fine, but why did I seem so serious about it? Why couldn't I be a little more relaxed? A little more like Leo? I had spent 31 years understanding this pattern and adjusting for it, telling myself it was not personal that families distribute attention unevenly as a matter of temperament, that it would shift when I had something large enough to make visible. The doctorate was supposed to be that thing. 8 years of evidence submitted in the form of a credential that the seriousness they had always treated as a liability was actually the entire point. The graduation line formed in the corridor outside the main hall. Families pressed close to their graduates around me, adjusting hoods, taking photographs, performing the particular proud fussiness of people who understand what the day represents and want to be visibly part of it. I adjusted my own hood using a reflection in the glass panel of a fire extinguisher case on the wall, and stood straight and waited for the line to move. The woman ahead of me in line was perhaps 65, receiving an eddy based on the hood color, with the calm and slightly amused quality of someone who has decided to enjoy the ceremony rather than endure it. She turned and asked if my family had found good seats. I said they were not able to make it. She looked at me for a moment, not with pity, with something more considered and more direct, and said, "Then I will cheer for you. I will make enough noise for all of them." I thanked her. We turned back toward the front of the line, and I did not say anything else, and neither did she. When they called my name, Dr. Clara Hayes, I heard her from across the auditorium before I was halfway across the stage. A full sustained cheer, completely unself-conscious from a woman I had known for 11 minutes. I shook the dean's hand and accepted the diploma and kept walking, and somewhere between the stage and the far stairs, I understood something I had been circling for years without landing on. I had spent 31 years adjusting myself to earn a front row seat in my own family's life. I was done doing that. I did not decide this dramatically. I decided it the way you decide things that have been ready for a long time quietly, as the simple acknowledgement of what is already true. The post-ceremony reception was in a courtyard off the main hall, tables arranged with mediocre white wine and a cheese plate that had been sitting out long enough to develop a certain quality of resignation. I stood at a high-top table alone with my diploma in its leather folder and checked my phone. Leo's BBQ had generated 17 new entries in the group chat since the ceremony began, a running documentation of a celebration I had not been invited to and would not have attended even if I had. My morning message still had no reaction of any kind. I put the phone back in my bag, finished the wine, and started thinking clearly about what I actually wanted to do next. What I wanted to do next was already in my email. Dr. Crane at the Cascadia Institute for Food Systems Research in Seattle had sent a formal offer 3 weeks earlier for a position leading a federally funded contamination study across Pacific Northwest and Northern California distribution corridors. I had been sitting on the offer not from uncertainty about the work. The work was exactly what my doctorate had prepared me for, but from a residual hope that something about the graduation might shift the dynamic with my family, and that I might want to stay closer to Austin. Standing in that courtyard holding a diploma, no one in my family had watched me receive the residual hope used up the last of its available oxygen. I opened the email on my phone and accepted the offer. I felt nothing dramatic when I hit send. Just the clean, uncomplicated feeling of a decision that was already made being formally recorded. I also initiated a legal name change. Hayes was my father's name, and I was leaving it behind without particular anger. It simply no longer fit what I was becoming, the way a coat stops fitting, and you donate it without ceremony. My maternal grandmother's maiden name had been Monroe. She had died when I was 14 before she could see any of what came after, and the only thing she had left me specifically was a note inside a birthday card. You are going to be extraordinary. She had written it in her slightly left-leaning script and underlined the word extraordinary once firmly. I had kept the card in every apartment I had lived in. Clara Monroe was the name I filed for, and when the paperwork came back, it felt less like a change than like a correction. I sent a brief email to my parents and Leo announcing the move and the name change and wishing them well. My mother replied that Seattle was very far away and that Leo had been under considerable stress lately, and that she hoped I was not acting out of emotion. My father replied with one sentence, "You're making a big deal out of nothing as usual." Leo did not reply. I read both replies, noted them, and began packing my car. I drove north on I-35 and kept driving, stopping only as needed, until the Texas flatlands gave way to the greens of Oregon and then the specific gray-green of Washington in late fall. 2 days. I did not feel like I was escaping anything. I felt like I was going somewhere I had decided to go, which is a completely different motion. Seattle suited me in the way that cities suit people who prefer function over performance. The Cascadia Institute operated out of a building near South Lake Union, open plan, coffee smelling, with the low-grade urgency of people doing work that actually mattered and knew it. My role was to map contamination vulnerability windows in mid-tier cold chain infrastructure across the Pacific Northwest and Northern California distribution corridors. Where were the structural gaps through which contaminated product could move undetected, and how long did those gaps stay open before regulatory systems caught them? It was unglamorous, absorbing work, and I was good at it in the quiet, reliable way I had always been good at the things I approached carefully. The core problem in the data was a timing gap. The window between a contamination event at the distributor level and the moment it surfaces in FDA reporting was in our dataset consistently 18 to 22 days. During that window, contaminated product could move through the distribution chain, reach retailers, and land in consumers' refrigerators before any formal alert existed. The gap was not accidental, it was structural, built into reporting timelines by regulatory frameworks last updated when regional distribution moved more slowly than it does now. Finding it was the entire purpose of the study. Quantifying it precisely was going to be the contribution. I was cross-referencing the full dataset against the list of 11 high-risk regional distributors when the name appeared in the results. Hayes Fresh Distributors, Texas-Oklahoma Corridor Incorporated 4 years prior. I looked at it for a moment, then pulled the company registration records. My father's name was on the founding documents as principal officer. The company already had 2 informal FDA inquiries on file, the kind of preliminary contact that typically precedes formal enforcement when underlying issues remain unresolved across review cycles. I documented the discovery with a timestamp and wrote a formal conflict of interest disclosure within the hour. I walked it to Dr. Crane's office and told her exactly what I had found and what my relationship to the company was. She read the disclosure, asked 2 clarifying questions about the nature of my financial separation from the family business, and told me I would be recused from any policy recommendations related to Hayes Fresh Distributors, while remaining on the raw data analysis, which would be reviewed independently by a second team member. I confirmed the protocol, thanked her, and went back to my desk. I want to be clear about one thing because some people who hear this story assume the decision to proceed was difficult or that I weighed it against some competing obligation. I did not. The data was what it was. Families buy food from regional distributors every day and assume the cold chain is sound. My father's name on a registration document did not change the contamination window, or the two informal FDA inquiries, or the 18 to 22 days during which something could go wrong at his company and no one would know. It made the facts personally costly. That is a different category of problem. I called my father before the report was finalized. This was not required of me. The recusal covered my professional obligations, and I had no duty to notify the subject companies in advance. I called because I was his daughter, and because whatever had happened between us, I believed he deserved 60 days of advance warning to conduct a self-audit and get ahead of the legal exposure before the FDA received the full findings. I thought about whether to call for approximately 1 day, and then called because the alternative was not calling, and not calling would have meant letting the consequences arrive without warning, and I was not willing to be that person. He picked up on the second ring. I told him plainly what I had found, what the FDA timeline was, and what I recommended. I used clear language and did not soften the technical details because softening them would have been a disservice. I told him the company had two informal inquiries already on file and that the formal report would document the contamination window in specific evidence terms. I told him 60 days was enough time to address the structural issues if he started immediately. He reacted with the defensive anger of someone who has been told an uncomfortable truth and has decided that the discomfort is the fault of the person delivering it. He said I was exaggerating. He said computer models were not the same as reality. My mother took the phone at some point. I could hear her in the background before she came on the line, and her voice was the voice she uses when she has decided something is an attack. Tight, certain, already composed for opposition. She said I was using a computer model to destroy 30 years of her husband's work. She said it with the conviction of someone who has identified the narrative and is no longer interested in the facts. My father got back on the line. His voice had shifted to something harder and more specific. He said he knew what this was really about. He said I was doing this because they had missed my graduation, that I was using my position to settle a personal score, that this was spite dressed up as science. He said it with the certainty of a man who has found an explanation that makes him the victim and is going to hold on to it. I said, "You skipped my doctorate for a BBQ. I am trying to prevent a public health event. Those are not the same story." Then I ended the call. I sat at my kitchen table for a few minutes after hanging up. Not from doubt. I did not doubt the call or the report or the decision. I sat there because ending a call with your father that way, even when it is the right thing to do, has a weight to it that does not go away immediately. I let it sit. Then I opened my laptop and began drafting an email to a public interest whistleblower attorney, whose name I had identified 2 weeks earlier as a precaution. I documented the full timeline of my recusal, every interaction with my family since the discovery, and the specific language my father had used on the call. I sent the email that evening and had a response by the next morning. I kept working. The data was what it was, and the report was going to say what it said, and the 60 days I had given my father were his to use as he chose. 61 days after the call, the FDA received the full report. Hayes Fresh Distributors received formal regulatory action within the following quarter, written warnings, substantial fines, and the loss of 3 major distribution contracts that had together represented the majority of the company's annual revenue. I followed the public record as it developed with the same detachment I apply to any outcome I have documented submitted and am no longer professionally responsible for. I did not feel triumph. I want to be honest about that because people tend to expect triumph in this part of the story. What I felt was the specific, unsatisfying, heavy relief of someone who did the right thing in a situation where it cost something real, and who now has to live with all of the consequences, including the ones that are not satisfying and the ones that are. The whistleblower protection process moved slowly and then concluded with a financial settlement whose terms I am not able to discuss in specifics. I used a portion of it to buy a small house in the Beacon Hill neighborhood of Seattle Woods Siding, painted gray, a narrow back garden, a view of the Cascades on clear days when the clouds cooperate. I used another portion to establish a scholarship at the Cascadia Institute for low-income rural students pursuing food systems research. I named it after my grandmother. The application asks one short essay question: describe a problem in your community that most people have learned to accept as normal. I read every application myself, which takes a full weekend twice a year, and I have not regretted it once. My mother sent a handwritten letter approximately 8 months after the FDA action. 4 pages in the handwriting I have known my entire life, covering the financial damage and Leo's anger and the difficulty of the past year in considerable detail. Near the end of the 4th page, in a paragraph that felt slightly different from the rest, the pen pressure lighter as if she had paused and restarted, she wrote, "I don't know if we understood what your graduation meant to you." That was it. Not a full apology. An acknowledgement partial and produced by consequence rather than by any internal reckoning I could identify. I filed the acknowledgement and the absence of a real apology in 2 separate categories in my mind, and did not pretend they were the same thing because they were not. I replied not warmly, not coldly, just accurately. I said I had received the letter and hoped they were finding their way through it and that I was well. We exchange sparse emails now a few times a year about nothing in particular. I do not know if that will change. I am genuinely not waiting for it to, which is itself something I had to learn. Here is what I want to leave you with, and I will say it directly. Some people will only recognize what you are worth when your absence costs them something. That is a painful thing to understand about people you love, and I am not going to tell you it stops hurting quickly because it does not. But here is the other side of it. If the people closest to you have spent years treating your reliability as an entitlement and your achievements as background noise, then staying in that arrangement out of loyalty is not loyalty to them. It is disloyalty to yourself sustained over time at a cost you have been quietly absorbing and not fully accounting for. You are allowed to account for it. You are allowed to stop